On May 18th, 2021, Ashley Randele would sit by her father's side as he let out his last few breaths. Ashley's father, Thomas, was 71 years old and had been living with terminal lung cancer. While he had recently started chemotherapy, his health had unfortunately taken a turn for the worst. In their last conversation together, Ashley's world would be turned upside down when Thomas would give a deathbed confession. He would tell Ashley his real name was Theodore John Conrad. And what she first thought was some kind of bad dad joke turned into her nightmare. He was one of America's most wanted fugitives and had been on the run for more than 5 decades. This is the story of Thomas Randele, also known as Theodore John Conrad. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Perplexity, a mystery podcast. As always, I'm your host, Kadra. If you're new here, hello and welcome to the show. I tell tales every single week that have perplexed me. So if you love a good mystery that leaves you wanting more, don't worry, you're in the right place. And if you end up enjoying today's episode, I would love if you continue to follow along and leave a 5-star review wherever you listen. If you're a returning listener, hello, my friends. Welcome back. So happy you're here, and I have a great story today. I'm also not alone. Today, I am joined by Kim S. from A Good Night for a Murder podcast.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I'm so excited you're here. And I've been enjoying listening to your podcast. I was just telling Kim, I just started following her on socials too. She's got some really cool TikToks that I've been enjoying as well.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for the follow. Yes, please check it out at A Good Night for a Murder.
Yes. We cover a lot of similar topics, and I would love to let you talk more about your podcast at the end, but just to plug a little bit, it's like a Victorian true crime podcast and covers some similar topics to mine. We've both talked about the Servant Girl Annihilator case, and yeah, I just really enjoy. She's also a female single host storyteller, which I feel like is actually kind of hard to find. I feel like it's a lot of co-hosts. What do you think, Kim?
Yeah, no, I agree. There's times that I wish I did have like another person to bounce off of, but sometimes just for the sake of recording and scheduling, I was like, hey, I have stories that I can tell and I'm going to put them out there. So.
Well, I think you do a great job.
Oh, thank you. Same to you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Well, I have a couple of quick announcements before we get started, but as you heard in the introduction, we do have a very exciting story. So we'll get to that in just a minute, but I did want to let everybody know, in case you haven't noticed, Perplexity now has ads. And that is a very recent change. I have made some Instagram posts about how I've been in the process of changing hosting platforms. And with that has come monetization a little bit, not much. But with that being said, I did just want to give everybody that heads up. I listen to a lot of podcasts myself. I know ads can be annoying, but it is one way to help the podcast at least pay for itself. And I wanted to remind everyone as well, if you want ad-free episodes, those are available on Patreon for as little as $1 a month. And I'm offering a 7-day free trial for all of my tiers. So go check that out if that interests you. Also, just a quick birthday shout out to my patron, Amanda, who's also one of my good friends and a fellow podcaster. So happy birthday, Amanda. And just a quick trigger warning for today's episode. As always, this podcast is not for children, so listener discretion is advised. And all of the sources used for today's episode will be down in the show notes. So without further ado, let's get into it. Okay, Kim. So when Ashley Randele would receive this shocking news about her father, she, knew him as Thomas, and they had been living in Lynnfield, Massachusetts. As I stated in the introduction, her father had terminal lung cancer. He had been diagnosed just 2 months before, and the past few months had obviously been hell for their family. She was seeing her dad constantly in pain. He was losing his sense of humor and resilience. And it was also unfortunate because the doctors were hopeful that when he started chemotherapy, it would buy him a few more years, but they were too late and he passed just 2 months later.
Yeah, that was a wild opening. I can't imagine.
I can't imagine already having to deal with that. And it sounds like they were so incredibly close. And then getting this news on top of it. Like, to me, that's probably like my worst nightmare is like losing a loved one and then like also the truth just kind of falling out from under you in a way.
Oh yeah, like the whole world is turned upside down. Like, there'd be a part of you, I'm sure, that would just want to completely ignore that, statement, like pretend it didn't even happen. Like, how could it possibly even, you know?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So Thomas would confess the truth about his past to his daughter just a short while before he would pass, and it was actually after they had watched an episode of one of their favorite TV shows together, NCIS. And he was reasoning that he couldn't take this secret to his grave. He wanted his family to find out the truth from him. And Ashley's father would implore her, after sharing this news, for her to not look into it. But naturally, she needed to know what was going on. And I mean, she would lay down that night and she was tossing and turning. So that night that she found out, got on her computer in her bedroom, went to Google because he had told her his real name. And so she typed Ted Conrad missing. And the first thing she saw was an article with the title Vault Teller Robs Bank. She would find hundreds more articles about him, and the rabbit hole quickly became deeper and deeper. Ashley would later go on to share her story in a new true crime podcast on The Binge called Smokescreen: My Fugitive Dad. Ashley would emphasize that despite this shock, she, quote, wanted the world to know Tom Randele. I wanted people to know how amazing he was as a dad, husband, and friend. I don't think you're ever emotionally ready for that. But everyone else was spitting out these stories about a kid who loved fast cars, pretty women, and lived the high life. End quote. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's wild. I have so many questions.
Yes, we're going to start getting into the background here in a second. It'll come together, but feel free to interrupt.
Yeah, remind me the decade or the year that we're in, please.
Yeah, sure. I know this was very recent. Okay, so he died May 18th, 2021.
Oh, 2021. Okay. I was imagining like the 70s for some reason. Like this feels like a very 70s story.
That's fair. Well, his history of crime goes back 5 decades. So we are about to be in that time period. So Ashley gets this news, and she would eventually convince her dad that his wife, her mother, Kathy, also needed to know the truth. So Kathy would later find out, and she would do the same thing that Ashley did. She's reading through all these articles on the internet. She's shell-shocked. This is really sad. Ashley would say about this, quote, she had known him for the better part of 40 years. So to learn this massive secret, I can't imagine how traumatizing that was for her, end quote.
That's wild.
Yeah, I mean, that's like those nightmare stories where it's like someone has a secret family or something. It's just like,
right. And it's always like the wife, they always ask, like the wife never knew, like there was no like signs, like the wife or girlfriend never knows.
right.
It's crazy.
We're about to get into some signs in a second, but even then, I feel like it's still so subtle. It's like I feel like if it were me, these were not things that I would even think into.
Mm-hmm.
Several sources I found also say Kathy has declined to be interviewed, which I don't blame her at all.
Reasonable.
Yeah, so the accounts we have are from Ashley, but by Ashley and then some other old friends of Thomas Randele. Ashley had a really good childhood. She had 2 loving parents, Kathy and Thomas. They were very involved in her life. They went to all of her extracurriculars, piano recitals, school plays, soccer games. They were literally like an all-American family. Very normal, middle class. He often sported double-pleated khaki pants and golf shirts. Like he was that dad, you know?
So this is like her bio dad. This wasn't like a stepdad to her? Wow.
No.
Okay.
Yeah, it's her bio dad. Good question. He would also donate to local police charities. He was known to binge hit TV shows, and his favorite show was NCIS. Ashley recalls her father tucking her in every night when she was younger and singing her lullabies, one that he had even made just for her called My Ashley. She always considered her family to be very open, normal, and without secrets. However, looking back, there were some signs. When Ashley was in high school, she had enrolled in a French class and she had the opportunity to go to France. So she's super excited. She's telling her parents about this trip, and she's also like, hey, I can go for much cheaper if you guys chaperone. So immediately, Kathy is like, oh, that sounds so fun. Yeah, Tom, let's go. And Thomas was reluctant. He wasn't excited about this. And, Kathy and Ashley are like, why not? Like, this is a once in a lifetime trip. And he would insist, like, just go on and have fun without me. I'll stay home with the cat.
That's so funny. I could see where it was going. I was like, well, he can't go. Obviously, he's,
Right.
under a false identity. But like, also, my dad would rather stay home with the dog. Like, he's gonna watch the dog.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So something you could brush off and just be like, okay, like, yeah, I've never really seen my dad travel, so I guess he's not a traveler. Like my
Mhm.
fiance's grandmother, she has never been anywhere outside of Texas. She hates planes, she hates traveling. Like some people are just like that.
Yeah, not that unusual.
Ashley would also recall a time that she was considering doing an at-home DNA test to learn about her cultural heritage. But when she told her dad about this, he would act kind of weird. And he would say, I don't know why people would want to have your DNA. That just feels weird. Ashley brushed it off at the time, thinking maybe he just thought this was some kind of weird invasion of privacy. But looking back, Ashley now knows her father could not have gone to France because he didn't have a passport. He also couldn't get a passport without a birth certificate. She also knows if she would have done that DNA test, she would have made the startling discovery that it matched her with relatives she had no idea even existed.
Yeah, those DNA tests will drag everything out.
Yeah, it's been really cool to see those like find like killers in really cold cases too.
It's
Like the
true. Yeah, they've been really helpful in that regard. But like also the response, a lot of people don't like the privacy of it or the, lack of privacy that they think it gives. So I think that's also like a reasonable response for like when this occurred, when those tests became really popular and everything. But yeah, I did one like just for my ancestry, but there's no like my family is a very small family. I'm not suspicious of any secrets in it, but there is like that little part of you that thinks like, oh, connect me with relatives. Like, do you click that button? Because you might learn a lot that you might not have bargained for. So it's
right.
interesting.
Yeah, I haven't done one of those. I've wanted to, but part of me just hasn't, only because it's expensive. But I also get the idea of it just being like, oh, it's kind of an invasion of my privacy. Like there are private people. So far it's like all of these signs are things that I'm like, yeah, I could see why they didn't pick up on any of that,
Yeah,
you
they're
know?
not huge red flags. I agree.
No, yeah, not at all. He was also very casual, a very calm, level-headed guy. So let's get into this massive secret. For this, we're going to go back to 1969, around the time that you were suspecting this was taking place. We're going to talk now about Theodore John Conrad, also known as Thomas Randele. When Theodore was 20 years old, he was working as a bank teller for Society National Bank and living in Cleveland, Ohio. So he was very young when all of this happened. He had started the job not that long ago. He started it in January of that year, and things were going well. One Friday evening in July, a day after he had just turned 20, he ended his shift and took with him a paper bag containing $215,000, which is over 1.7 million in today's money.
Is there a motive? He just like, because he could do it?
There's some theories for motive that we'll talk about in a second, yeah. But also
Okay.
he's 20 is my first thought. Like it's
That's
just
true. The frontal lobe has not.
hasn't fully developed. Yeah, exactly. But despite being 20, Theodore had managed to just pull off one of the biggest bank robberies to date in Cleveland history. The theft also wasn't discovered until several days later, and by then it was too late. He had skipped town,
I was
and
going to say, did he like continue working? Did he show up the next day? Like,
no, he was
okay,
gone. He
the
skedaddled.
wind.
So the case has been featured. I haven't watched it, but it was featured on Unsolved Mysteries and also on America's Most Wanted. And investigators, while all this was going on, were chasing leads far and wide. They got the FBI involved, but to no avail. They had no idea where Theodore Conrad went. So pretty impressive, I've got to say, for a 20-year-old.
Yeah.
Authorities would claim when they looked into Conrad, they would find he was obsessed with the 1968 film The Thomas Crown Affair, and noticed the name Thomas because that later became his name, Thomas Randele. So this is one of the big theories, is that he was basically obsessed with this movie, inspired by it, because it's a film about a $1 million businessman who pulls off this major bank heist for sport. And I've heard stories before of people like being obsessed with a movie that has a crime and then they carry it out. I could see it happening, but that's really the only theory that people have come up with, is that he was just this young 20-something who was obsessed with this movie and thought he could pull it off. He had also moved for a while to the Boston suburb near the location of where the original movie had been filmed, like right after he pulled off the robbery. So he's kind of living this similar lifestyle. Conrad had also bragged about the crime to his friends, saying that taking money from the bank would be simple.
He was right.
Yeah, I mean, he wasn't wrong.
Yeah.
At the time, Conrad wasn't living in the best family circumstances either. That's just what some of the sources said, but what those circumstances were, I couldn't tell you. He wanted to start over for whatever reason, and the money gave him a way to do that. Investigators would also learn this was very much premeditated. Conrad had checked out all the security. He saw how easy it would be to also get a new social security card. So, in case you didn't know, it's 1969. It's not a hard thing to do. You could literally walk into your local registrars and just say, I lost my card. I need a new one. And there you go. Yeah.
Wild times.
Wild times. Yeah, that's like those stories where they can just like walk onto a plane before like 9/11, obviously.
Right. This is reminding me of the film was Catch Me If You Can with Leonardo DiCaprio. Like that was also based on a true story. Yeah, he was like, I'm a pilot. So he was.
Exactly. Theodore Conrad had even invited his girlfriend at the time and one of his friends into the bank vault with him for a chill hang while he was on lunch one day. So, all of this to say, the bank didn't have great security.
Sure didn't.
Once Conrad took the money and skipped town, he was able to get the fresh start he wanted. And he started living this higher life for a little while, similar to the Thomas Crown Affair. He was doing professional golfing, he was selling luxury cars, he was spending a lot of money, and he built a name for himself in his small town. He was sending letters to his girlfriend still at the time. He was kind of traveling around. He sent letters from DC, he sent a letter from LA, and he was just, like, I love you, I miss you. But that was the only lead that they had, and they couldn't really, I guess, trace anything down. So the case went cold pretty quickly for the FBI and law enforcement.
Interesting. So they were tracking him. They just like couldn't catch up with him.
Basically, yeah, kind of like the catch me if you can thing, right?
Gosh, he just sounds lucky, man.
I think the other thing too is like I always have to put myself or try to put myself in that time period too. Like it was just harder to get a hold of people. It was harder to find people. I don't think that a ton of like districts and stuff were working together at this time either.
That is for sure true. Yeah. And especially if he was just like traveling around the country, that was not staying in one place.
And other than like the snail mail that he would send to his girlfriend and then I'm sure immediately like go somewhere else, he had cut off all contact with everybody else. He had no contact with his family. His family presumed him to be dead, which is pretty awful.
Yeah, they weren't looking for him.
I don't know. I know there's some family members later on, like when they found out this whole thing, they were like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad he's okay, blah, blah, blah. But then there's other sources that say he wasn't in a good family situation. So it sounds a little bit complicated. His good friend at the time, Russell Metcalf, like when he was still Theodore, also never heard from him again. They had made plans to play golf that Saturday, July 12th, but when he knocked on Conrad's apartment door, there would be no answer. And soon, Metcalf was pulled in and interviewed by the FBI. And Metcalf would say to them, quote, "You must be the FBI. How much did he get?" End quote. And he claims he was joking, but interesting comment.
Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like he just like bragged to a bunch of friends about this, but I don't know if they took him seriously or not. But yeah, because I mean, he had no criminal history as far as I could find.
Yeah, I could see how he'd be viewed as like a storyteller. Like, oh, I work at the bank. It would be so easy. It's just like, oh, sure, buddy.
Sure, and he's like a 20-year-old guy, you know? So like they're gonna say some shit, you know what I mean?
Right. Hmm.
So this case has been compared to the 1971 case of hijacker D.B. Cooper, who parachuted out of a plane with $200,000 and vanished over the vast wilderness of the Pacific Northwest and was never seen again. Lots of similarities with just the, I think, the age and how much they stole, never seen again. But Conrad's crime soon became nothing more than a whisper in the wind because Apollo 11's historic flight to the moon was happening at this time. So Conrad would assume the name Thomas Randele in January of 1970, and he would get a job at a country club outside of Boston, becoming the manager. Eventually, he met the mom, Kathy, in the late 70s. And by then, all of Thomas's riches were actually gone. It's not clear to authorities what happened to all of the money. That's kind of part of the other mystery. But Marshal Service has speculated it could have been lost early on through some bad investments. I mean, he was 20, but weird.
Just kind of frittered it away.
Yeah, I guess, but still, it's like that's nearly $2 million in today's money. So I'm just like,
Yeah.
how did you get rid of it that fast?
I don't know, man. Yeah, that's funny. One of the reasons that I think telling like Victorian true crime stories is, so entertaining is because they could literally pick up and say they were anybody and go anywhere, right? Like there was
Yeah.
nothing, no records, no anything. You could be whoever you wanted. And that's like one of the things that's so compelling to me about a lot of the stories. But here we are in, the 70s and the same thing happened. He picked up when somewhere else he says, I'm this person now, and he's just going to start a new life. Yeah.
Well, it's always funny too, like all those disappearance cases where you hear the police like maybe they ran off and started a new life, and you're like, shut up, no, they didn't. And in this case, that's actually what happened. So
Yeah,
yeah,
it's like not so different.
it is compelling. Yeah, and it's crazy that it happened in more modern day. 'Cause that's true. It's the Victorian cases are always so fascinating. They got away with so much. The investigations, it always baffles me how they had like a whole town walking through the crime scene. Just the things that have changed is crazy.
But some things don't, and it's
That's true. So, assuming the name Thomas Randele, he would get a full-time job in the car business and get married in 1982. They eventually had their daughter Ashley, and Thomas's/Theodore's life from there on remained very quiet. They didn't lead a fancy life. They were super middle class. Ashley has explained in interviews they used a lot of like used cars. They did not come from money by any means. So after 40 years in the car business, Thomas would retire. And in 2014, Thomas and Kathy, for some reason, filed for bankruptcy protection. That's really what we know about that part of his life, is it just seems quite ordinary. So that's another reason why I'm like, yeah, how would they have known?
yeah, that's interesting. I wouldn't think that he would pull off this one heist one time. It just doesn't seem like you would expect someone to reoffend in some way or
Right.
another, whether
Yeah.
they get into like gambling or something like that, like later in
Yeah.
life. But now they just live like a very middle of the road, sounds like up and up.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess like a positive way you could see it is like thinking of it, how they worded it in some of these articles is like maybe he really just was in a bad situation and needed a fresh start. So he took some insured money. Not saying that that's what you should do.
Yeah.
But, it's not like he was this awful criminal. It sounds like he never, reoffended. So, flashing forward to Ashley and her mother Kathy getting all of this crazy news, and of course, grieving the loss of Thomas, the women were struggling. They didn't know if they should go to the authorities. They knew that their lives had already changed so much and been shattered, and they would only change more once the truth was out. So Ashley and her mother made a pact that they would keep the secret for just 1 year, allowing them time to grieve, and then they would share the truth with law enforcement.
Interesting decision.
Yeah, it's complicated, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know how to feel about that. Like I get it, but yeah, I don't know. It would end up not mattering though, because they were going to tell them in June of 2022, but they were soon left with no choice when a true crime writer in Cleveland actually took note of Thomas Randele's obituary, because people were still looking for this guy. They knew who Theodore was. They, are studying that case, and they took a notice to this guy, like, who's this Thomas Randele? What's up with his obituary? They just noticed his birthday was the same month and day as Theodore Conrad's, except a 2 year age difference. So he like lied about his age, said he was like 2 years older or younger.
Hmm.
And then the other thing that was weird about the obituary is it listed Theodore Conrad's parents' names, and then they just added Randele to the end.
Curious.
Yeah, so I'm wondering if he just kind of at that point was like, I don't really care if people know because I'm dead. But at the same time, it's like his family was involved in the funeral proceedings. So if they didn't want the truth to get out, I don't know. It just seems risky to me. But I think Thomas was better at keeping secrets probably than, than his
Yeah,
family.
I mean, they were like grieving. They were like, well, we have this information now, and whose name do we put? And we know the real names, and like this is how you write an obituary. So let's just write this in there. But yeah, that's curious.
Yeah, that's true. They could have been like very conflicted.
Yeah.
So this true crime writer, sees this, thinks it could be something. So he forwards the obituary to the U.S. Marshal of Northern Ohio, who then sent it off to the main U.S. Marshal that had been overseeing this case, Peter Elliott. And Elliott would later say documents from Conrad's college days would end up helping them confirm Thomas's true identity. So they figured all this out, put everything together, because when Kathy and Thomas had filed for bankruptcy, which I just kind of randomly mentioned, but it was important because when they filed for bankruptcy, they had to fill out forms, of course. So the U.S. Marshal would study Thomas's handwriting on the forms and was able to match it to Theodore Conrad's 1967 college application.
There it is.
So authorities would soon knock on Kathy and Ashley's door unannounced before they had confessed, who their father, who their husband was. And when Ashley answered, her facial expression would likely tell authorities all they needed to know. Peter Elliott would say something along the lines of, I think you know why we're here. So later on, Theodore Conrad's sister would say that she was relieved to find out her brother had gone on to live a full and happy life, thinking that he had died and they didn't know what had happened to him. Ashley would also tell Fox News, quote, Tom Randele was not a fake person. He was a man who is still missed by everyone who knew him. I want the world to at least get a glimpse of how special of a person he was, end quote. Now, naturally, Ashley has also struggled, though, and she's been open about this. She has struggled with the truth. She's gone through some anger and grieving, and she even for a while wondered if she should change her name.
Yeah, interesting.
Thomas's friends were also shocked to learn the truth, saying that he had always been very polite, gentle, well-spoken. But similar to Ashley, when his friends look back, there were a couple of signs. For example, Thomas Randele always kept a beard, rarely took off his baseball cap, and he was very reluctant to talk about his past. His friends really had no idea where he had grown up or anything about his extended family.
Like, yeah, suspicious in hindsight, right? But I don't think that is that unusual for someone you met in adulthood. Like, not everyone likes to talk about their childhood. It just is what it is.
That's true. Yeah. I mean, I have those moments where I'm just kind of like, am I a bad friend? Because I like will think about, man, I really don't know that much about my friends. So to me, it's like these are not even like yellow flags. They're just things that it's like, yeah, I could
In
see.
hindsight, it seems, yeah, you can look back and pick them out.
How would you know? So, what are your thoughts, Kim?
Yeah, that's pretty crazy. And you did say that she went on to be on like a series or something, the daughter?
Yeah, it's called Smokescreen, My Fugitive Dad. I want to like listen to that more and
Huh,
maybe there's more info in there about, just background and everything, but
that's crazy. I mean, these people who have these second lives, I just think that I feel like maybe I live like a very sheltered life. I just think that so many people have like secrets, right? Like I always say that when you go out to a bar or you go out to a restaurant, like think of the number of times you've been out somewhere. What is the likelihood that somebody sitting at the end of the bar or something has like they've committed a murder or they've committed a bank robbery or they've committed a crime and like walked away with it, or like that person, your coworker, has a second family or something crazy like that. I just think these like secrets are probably more common than a lot of people think, and they just people really do take it to their grave. But it's curious. I wonder, I guess his motivation for it was like a deathbed confession at the end. Do you think he just thought it was going to come out eventually? I was going to say, like, did he tell the daughter and say, don't tell your mother?
he told the daughter, I don't know if he necessarily said, don't tell your mother, but he told the daughter and kind of confided in her. And eventually there was a conversation we do know, according to Ashley, that was like, you need to tell Kathy. So he did, but yeah, only after Ashley said. But then also, there's some sources that say the reason he told them is because the truth was probably going to come out after he died, and he wanted
Mm-hmm.
them to first hear it from him, which I totally
Mm-hmm.
get. But yeah, I have that thought too all the time, actually. So it's nice to have someone validate it. I'll be in like big public places, and I'm like, I wonder how many people here have committed a crazy crime. And everybody's so seemingly normal, right? So
Yeah. Yeah. There's just, you never know what people have going on, like behind the scenes. So it's interesting. So was there any like legal repercussions after that investigator came? Or was it, I mean, they didn't do anything that,
right, yeah, I don't believe so. I think they had initially like the case got a little bit personal because if my memory serves, the US Marshal that was working on the case eventually passed away, and then his son took over, and his son was like adamant about finding who did it, getting kind of justice for his dad because it took so many years off of his life. And so they were
hmm,
gonna try to like move forward with legal charges. I know they didn't charge Ashley or Kathy with anything though, so then it was like after he died they were kind of like,
okay,
well,
good.
what else can we, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I was like, that wouldn't be very fair to them. So,
I
but
don't
I
think
could
so either, yeah.
understand. Yeah, I could understand how they would be very fearful, like, are they responsible for this? Like now all of a sudden, and they would try and prove that like the wife did know, like, how could she not know? And,
Right.
so interesting.
It is hard, I think, because I'm just like not a secretive person. And I feel like, I don't know, it's hard for me to get myself in that headspace of like, could I keep a giant secret like that my whole life from somebody? I feel like that would be so difficult. But then at the same time, it's like, I guess you rationalize it with yourself over and over. And like, he was so young when he did it, and then
Mhm.
he never reoffended. So it's just kind of like, you tell yourself over and over it's fine until you believe it. So,
Yeah, some people are very good at like compartmentalizing.
yeah.
you know I mean, you have to be, and it's like it's not a negative thing, it's like a very normal thing. Like doctors and nurses who work in like traumatic settings have to live this way, right, with what they
Yeah,
see or experience or that sort of thing. But
that's a good point. I do work in healthcare, and I've worked in trauma units, and I've
mm,
seen some very traumatizing things, and I'll come home and like tell some things to my fiance, and he's like, "Are you okay?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm fine."
yeah, you just take it
So,
and you put it in this part of your brain, and
sorry.
so no worries.
I'm using this like little like rickety table, and I like hit my knee, and it's like the whole thing shakes. Yeah. I need like a
No
desk
worries.
for in here.
Yeah. No, I'm trying. It's hard to sit still. It's hard for me.
Well, any other final thoughts before I go to an outro?
No, thank you for sharing that story. It was interesting.
Absolutely. Yeah, I thought it would be a fun one. I really haven't covered like a bank heist or a deathbed confession before, and those topics have been like in my notes on like my list of topics to cover for forever. So it's also a little bit of a shorter story. So I thought it'd be good to cover with a guest so we can kind of, converse through
Mhm.
it. So that, everybody, is the perplexing story of Thomas Randele's deathbed confession, also known as Theodore John Conrad, the 20-year-old that pulled off one of the most impressive bank heists in Cleveland history. I would like to say a special thank you to Kim from A Good Night for a Murder podcast. And Kim, I would love to just give you a couple minutes to tell everybody about your show because I really think my listeners would enjoy it.
Oh, sure. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that story and having me on. My podcast is A Good Night for a Murder. It's a Victorian true crime podcast. It's currently in its third season, and it covers true crime of the Victorian era, mostly in the UK and the US. I've covered murders, serial killers, missing persons, and Victorian scam and con artists. I also love a good Victorian ghost story. So whenever it makes sense to incorporate a little of the supernatural, I will bring that in. I've covered stories that are well known, like Jack the Ripper, Lizzie Borden, H.H. Holmes. We talked about the Texas servant girl annihilator earlier. I've also covered like lesser known cases like Christiana Edmonds. She was known as the chocolate cream poisoner, missing socialite Dorothy Arnold. And then another one is a spirit photographer, William Mumler. He was also a con artist. Or was he for real? You have to decide for yourself. The episodes are released monthly right now. Each includes what I call a Victorian society tip at the top of every episode. They're about Victorian lifestyle, manners, society rules, how they celebrated certain holidays. If you just want to live more Victorian life yourself, those are fun. I also produce bonus content to accompany each full episode that is available through my Patreon. So that's just kind of a further discussion of what I talked about in the main episode on the podcast feed. So sometimes it's a similar story. Sometimes it's like if there's a ghost story that goes along with a murder or something, it's just a little bit of bonus content to continue the discussion. And that's on my Patreon subscription. Also on Patreon, there is a new series this season called A Good Night Snack. And I made that to kind of talk a little bit more about interesting stories and topics that are true crime adjacent. They're more human interest or Victorian lifestyle. I recently the first one was about Victorians and their obsession with Egyptian mummies. I also talked about Madame Tussaud on there and her wax museum. There's so often that I would do a story and I would say, and they were featured in Madame Tussaud's Chamber of Horrors. So I profiled her. And again, that's monthly on Patreon as well. Those members get, 2 episodes a month, but the regular podcast is once a month. You can listen to it anywhere you've got podcasts, Apple, Spotify, all the rest. It is on YouTube. I also have Instagram and a TikTok, also a website where you can visit the episode blog, see some photos. You can hear all the episode trailers there too. So if that sounds interesting to you, I invite you to please come check it out.
Yes, thank you so much, Kim. Lots of really good topics that you cover. And I will put like your links in the episode description.
Yes, thank you.
Go check it out. And if you guys enjoy A Good Night for a Murder, let Kim know that Perplexity sent you. That would be wonderful. And I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode. Drop a comment on YouTube if you're watching there. If you enjoyed it, let me know your thoughts. And if you haven't done so yet, please support the show by leaving a 5-star review wherever you listen. Hit the subscribe button on YouTube. And if you really want to support the show, patreon.com/perplexity mystery podcast is where you can do that. All of my tiers have a 7-day free trial. I just released a bonus episode all about the alleged serial killer active in Austin, Texas right now. I'm also working on some documentary coverage right now that's going to pair with an episode that I'm releasing on the regular podcast soon. Lots of bonus content coming out nearly every week. So go check those things out if it interests you. Other support links are in the show notes. And you all are amazing. Hope you have a great week and stay safe. I will talk to you soon. Bye.